You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Archaeology Show. TAS goes behind the headlines to bring you the real stories about archaeology and the history around us. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeology Show, episode 288.
On today's show, we talk about a Swedish sacrificial site, Neanderthals making glue, and what they got right and what they got wrong in Gladiator II.
Let's dig a little deeper. Don't get your hands caught in the resin. Welcome to the Archaeology Show.
Hello.
We are coming fresh off our, I would say, fairly successful 10th anniversary event.
Yeah, it was super fun.
Successful from a we all pulled it off standpoint.
Yeah, we all did it.
Yes, it was 8 hours of live podcasting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was pretty good. I mean, I definitely didn't do all of that, but I was in and out and I heard bits and pieces of all the different shows and it was really great. So yeah.
It was fun. It was some really good shows, a lot of good participation. I really wish there was more, but it's tough to do with live events on a Sunday.
It is, yeah. But what it told me, and I guess I probably should have known this already, is it's really not that hard to record live when it's very similar to what we already do when we're recording. So I feel like you and I can pretty easily work more live stuff into our normal recording schedule. So
well, and one of the things I think would be maybe fun to do is, with the way that we don't record with this other software that actually causes a little bit of a microphone conflict. Yeah. So what we could do if we wanted to, if we're ever just prepared for it and we're in a good setting, is we just turn on the Discord live stage.
Yeah.
While you can literally turn it on anytime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It means if we're recording live, I won't yell at you about anything. Probably.
Still yell.
Did I yell at you yesterday? I didn't really yell at you.
No, not really.
I did a lot of head shaking.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it might make our editing go better because maybe we're forced to make fewer mistakes.
Oh, maybe. I don't know. I the thing is with live, it's so weird, right? I could feel myself saying and filling the empty spaces, which when you and me are just sitting here recording, talking to each other, I don't do that. So
do you?
I don't think I do. When I'm editing it, I don't. So anyway, live is a different beast, but it it's kind of fun too. So anyway, it was fun.
Indeed.
And that content will be available. Most of it, the ones that didn't have technical difficulties, will be available.
Ours will for sure.
Yeah, ours will for sure. And any of the other ones that worked will be available to subscribers, not subscribers.
Yeah, members.
Members. Yeah.
At archpodnet.com/members. So if you're a member of the show, if you're a member of the network, you can go to our website, and it's not all up yet. It'll be up sometime later this week.
I'm hoping by the end of the month. Isn't that a little bit more reasonable?
Which is later this week.
Is it?
The end of the month is Sunday.
Oh, it is Sunday. Okay, well then into the first week of December. We have a busy couple weeks coming up.
But we're not editing this stuff either. So it's just getting cut together into the podcast templates and then dropped into the members only stuff because we want you to get the live experience. So we're not going to edit the shows.
Yeah,
so,
totally. So.
Yeah. Okay. And it's all mostly audio, by the way, too. The live was video. So if you show up live, and again, our Discord server is linked into the show notes and it's free. And Discord is a new app. It's free to download, free to have an account there. Mm-hmm. It's a new thing you have to learn. Don't get me wrong, but it is where we're interacting right now. And there's a lot of good conversations happening over there. There's channels for each show. We used to have a Slack channel that was part of a members only benefit, but we took that away.
Yeah,
and
nobody was really using it.
Well, people were using it, but it was only members.
Yeah,
and now you don't have to be a member to be on the Discord.
Right.
But as a consequence, we're saying, okay, any live events we do, you also don't have to be a member for. But members do get access to all this content whenever they want. They don't have to show up live, right? So... Okay, speaking of showing up live, we're going to show up live in Sweden in March, which is going to be super fun. And I don't know if I like this article because of that or what. It's starting to kind of pop out for me because I'm doing a little bit of Swedish on Duolingo just so I can get a little base. But I'm seeing these Sweden articles and I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we always do that. When we travel, we try to like incorporate the places we go into the podcast and talk about the archaeology, the history or whatever. So it just makes sense that we're getting excited about going to Sweden. And so this article about Sweden came up.
Yeah. So this one is called 5,000-Year-Old Sacrificial Site Stuns Archaeologists in Sweden. Extremely unusual. It's literally in quotes in the,
I like
in the title.
super hate these kind of titles.
Yeah, I know.
But I mean, this is from the Miami Herald. So
I mean, how stunned were they? Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this site is really cool. So maybe they were stunned. Who knows?
Well, archaeologists working in Hamar in southern Sweden found a 5,000-year-old sacrificial site with a stone walkway and a number of offerings. So this is a pretty cool site.
Yeah.
Hamar is a small village in Sweden, about 340 miles drive southwest from Stockholm. So I guess we'll probably just do that.
Well, that's kind of far away from Stockholm, but
I know, in the snow.
In the snow, yeah. It'll be covered.
Right. So to kind of set the stage on the site a little bit, the stone walkway was 160 feet across and had a semicircular shape. And during the Neolithic, a structure sat on the edge of the structure here that was part of it sat on the edge of a marshy wetland where people left offerings.
So I was kind of struggling to like mentally visualize this, but are they saying it's like a semicircular shaped walkway with like a structure inside of that like semicircular shape, or like on one of the ends or on the edge?
Just looking at the excavation, it kind of looks like it was inside of the walkway, but it's hard to say.
It is hard to tell.
They don't really get into it because they don't like the paper either.
And the pictures are pretty cool because there's pictures of both the excavation and the artifacts, which you don't always get in these kind of articles. So good on them for getting those. But it's kind of hard to tell what you're seeing. Like you can definitely see the stones of something, whether it's part of the structure of the walkway. I'm not sure, but yeah, it looks like a really cool site, regardless of how it was arranged. And those artifacts that they did find included pottery fragments, wood items, shaped flint tools, and animal bones. And while that doesn't sound completely significant, apparently there was a lot of these artifacts, which is what made it very significant.
Yeah, the project manager, Magnus Artursson, says that organic remains and artifacts with this level of preservation for this period are very unusual.
Okay.
And it's partly the wetland environment that they were in. It's not really a wetland anymore, it looks like. It's kind of dried out a bit.
Yeah. Or maybe it might be seasonal too. Like
could be, yeah. But I guess it was more marshy before. It's definitely not marshy now.
Yeah.
So, but when things were chucked into there, they were preserved, as those sorts of environments will tend to do.
Yeah, and the pictures, like we said, are really cool. There's an antler billet for flint knapping, a fishing hook, and a stylus for leatherwork. Just some of the things that they found. And yeah, I mean, you don't normally get antlers. Like that's the kind of organic material that, unless you're in a super dry environment, that just decomposes away. So that's the kind of preservation they're talking about, I think, is that they're getting things like that they don't normally.
Right. Apparently, too, just in reading this, there were pits inside the semicircular area in the marshy area and then outside, and people left offerings in both too, which was kind of an interesting thing. Like literally on purpose into these little pits. Yeah. They would leave these offerings, which was kind of neat.
My question is why are they so sure that it's religious offerings? What is it? The quality of the artifacts? Is it the arrangements?
I think it's because it doesn't look like a place where somebody lived. There's no living stuff, right?
Yeah, right. There's no cooking or anything like that.
And there doesn't even seem to be any burials that they've talked about. It's literally just like a ceremonial place where they brought stuff to put into these pits or to dump into the marsh. And it's like, someday in 1,000 years, somebody's going to go find one of our stupid wells or something like that where we chuck pennies into, right? Coins and stuff. Then we like, what the hell is going on here?
That's a ritual offering right there.
Ritual offering. Yeah. People are going to think that.
Yeah.
So, but their finds, what they're showing here, they say that it does suggest that it was a ceremonial complex and people gathered there at a certain time or certain times during the year to celebrate religious festivals and other things, because apparently that's, ethnographically correct as well.
Yeah, like it's known behavior for the people who live in this area. So it just makes sense and it fits into the story and the culture that we know. Yeah.
I mean, we have stuff like that today. People wouldn't necessarily call it religious, but ceremonial. I mean, you go to like music festivals that take place in the same place every time, every year.
True. Yeah.
I wonder what the ground looks like there. I mean, the thing with today is they clean everything up.
Yeah, right.
And we don't generally do ritual offerings.
Right. Well, and this is a culture of like throwaway items. So, it's all plastic and trash that gets taken away, right?
Maybe we should bring that back. We should have some kind of a festival, but the ritual offerings will be like old cell phones. Bring your old tech, we'll chuck it in the ground. That might be not environmentally sound.
I think probably not. Let's not suggest that.
Put a bunch of lithium batteries in the ground and just let them burn. They can tell too here that there were feasts with, and they said ritual butchering. And I'm like, are they just saying it was ritual because it's a ceremonial site, or are they saying it was ritual because
of the way they were cut?
The way they were cut or something. I mean, people have to eat. If they're going to be here for a festival, they're going to eat.
Yeah.
You're going to have food trucks, food carts, food oxen.
Right.
Food reindeer.
Yeah.
This is Sweden.
Or just like fires that food is cooked on, right?
Whatever. People might be selling stuff. Who knows? So.
Yeah.
But anyway.
It is interesting because I've never heard butchering referred to as ritual.
Oh, we definitely have. I think you just forgot.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because people sacrifice animals all the time.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Yeah. I definitely have heard of that.
I think that's what they're talking
sacrifice, but like to cut an animal in a certain way to fulfill some sort of ritual or spiritual thing, that I feel like is not something I've heard of very often.
Yeah, that is an interesting way to put it. So, yeah.
But I don't know if they're indicating that specifically, or if it's like you said, it's just...
It could be ethnographic too. It could just be a thing that cultures here have done for a long time. So, yeah. Anyway, the artifact deposition in both the wetland and in the open pits that I mentioned before are suggesting this. So they're chucking these things into both pits.
Yeah.
According to the evidence, people likely began gathering at the wetland site and leaving offerings here between 3,500 and 3,000 BCE. I mean, that is 5,000 years ago. That's crazy.
Yep, that's a long time ago.
Yeah, they talk about how the oldest part of this, which is always the part that grabs the headline, but they don't really talk about whether or not the evidence tells them or suggests how long this site was used for. Was it just like 5,000 years ago for a short period of time and then kind of lost? But the construction that went into the semicircular walkway and then probably any structures around there would suggest otherwise. I mean, it had to be a few generations at least.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So anyway, take a look at the pictures. Some of the pottery fragments show some striped and pecked styles. What? I could not remember the name that we give to like that reed impressed sort of style or fingernail impressed almost.
Yeah, I think.
What is that called?
Those are the words, I think.
Are those really
reed
the words?
Impressed, fingernail impressed. Okay. And like there's one with like really specific circular impressions on it too that look like maybe the end of a branch or something like that.
Or the end of a bone or stick. Yeah, exactly.
Something very flat, something that they flattened off and purposely used like that, which is also really neat.
Yeah.
Really cool looking pottery. I would love to see more information on this pottery actually, because it's just very detailed, very pretty.
Well, interestingly enough, the site began as ahead of a home construction project. I don't know if it was a particular home or like a housing development. It looks like it's in a field, so maybe hard to say, but basically definitely a CRM project for Sweden. And excavation will continue when more funding comes in, because they had probably just enough to say, oh crap, we found a bunch of stuff. Right. And now they've got to make their case.
Yeah. And then, oh crap, this stuff is really significant. So now we've got to make some decisions and do some things. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, while Sweden is dealing with their relatively young 5,000-year-old site, over in Gibraltar, we've got a 65,000-year-old hearth where Neanderthals are just having factories. Yeah. Sweden's like cooking up reindeer and butchering them ritually, and Neanderthals are like, we got a factory over here.
We've got glue, guys.
We've got glue. We're literally sticking this whole thing together.
Oh my God.
Welcome back to episode 288 of the Archaeology Show. And now we're going to Gibraltar, the big rock. Yeah. Really just the area. There's more than just a rock there. Yes. So this article is called 65,000-Year-Old Hearth in Gibraltar May Have Been a Neanderthal Glue Factory Study Finds. Factory? I know. It's an interesting word to use. We'll talk about that. But this was published in Live Science. And we do have to give a quick little shout out to Max B, one of our kind of super fans. He sends us stuff all the time. Oh, yeah. Thanks, Max. But he sent us a link to an article about this as well, a different article. But this has kind of been all over the news, or at least it was maybe a week or two ago when it first was published, because this is kind of cool and pretty big news in the Neanderthal world. So, we definitely wanted to cover it. And when Max sent us the article, we're like, definitely our listeners want to hear about this. Yeah. So this is on the Iberian Peninsula. And so like Spain, Portugal area, down where Gibraltar is. And this is, literally a little, they're calling it a factory. We'll get into that.
Yeah.
But
it's an interesting word choice, but yeah.
tar and like resin making factory.
Yeah.
So, all right. So this is, just to put it in context here, that's 65,000 years. This is 20,000 years before modern humans even set foot in this region.
Right. So
Homo
we're not
sapiens.
even, this isn't even Neanderthals like mixing with Homo sapien time. This is way pre-humans, modern humans.
Right. Yeah, and they used this sticky glue because Neanderthals also had projectile points.
Yes.
They had tools.
Weapons.
They had other things.
Yep. They were hunting and living and doing those things.
Yeah, and they used this sticky substance to basically help haft it to the spear shaft.
Yeah, exactly.
Or whatever they're doing.
Yeah. So let's get into this word factory. The reason they're using this is because it's really just a carefully designed hearth that they found.
Yeah.
A hearth with a very specific purpose that was carefully controlled in both heat and flame and all of those things. We'll get more into the specifics of it later. But I think they're calling it factory basically because they carefully designed it so that it could be used in this way over and over and over again. Is that kind of the impression you're getting for that word?
Not maybe over and over and over again. Well, for sure. They didn't just use it once.
Yeah.
But also in just the construction of it. This just wasn't a fire pit. This was well thought out. This had different elements to it. It had engineering design. It had, all the elements that, you would put on a common factory. I mean, and in a factory, the strict term factory is for pumping things out regularly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
for doing the same process multiple times and having the same results come out of it. And you can only get that if you have a very specialized process that you go through, so. Yeah. And in this case, it was the precisely controlling the fire and maintaining and managing the temperature of the fire, basically.
Yes. So as we mentioned, they made glue out of this, which was like tar and resin. And the fact that they did that is not the new bit here.
It's not new. Yeah.
We've known that they did that for a long time.
I think probably from residue on past weapons and points that were found or whatever.
Well, and we've seen evidence of the fact that they must have done this just by looking at weapons and things in rock art that dates up to 75,000 years old.
Okay. Yeah.
Which, you're like 75, 65, MED. That's 10,000 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a long time.
That is a long time. Yeah.
So a lot of time to perfect the process, so to speak, and to just keep on going with it.
And that's what this new hearth is showing, is that they were skilled engineers and that they had fine-tuned the glue making process to really, be able to create a hearth like this anytime they wanted to, create this glue.
So this hearth is pretty simple. It measures about 9 inches across by about 3.5 inches deep, and it has a sharply cut vertical walls. And my first thought was, okay, did the archaeologists do that? And they were digging it?
No, they probably had a profile and they had the lines,
Maybe.
Haven't you ever dug a hearth before? Come on.
I don't know how good archaeologists they were.
Come on.
There are also 2 short trenches about 1 inch long. I mean, don't even know how they could really see that in the record. That's kind of cool, but very short, that extend north and south out of the pit. So really just 2 little indentations, so to speak, keyholes almost, on the north and south side of the pit. I don't think the fact that they were north and south was probably significant. It's just happened probably to be where they were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that is the precise engineering bit there, is having those 2 trenches is what is giving them
the
more
vertical sides.
Yeah. And the vertical sides is what's giving them this control over heat and temperature and whatnot.
So an analysis of the remains and residue in the hearth shows that it contained charcoal, partially burned rock rose, which is a flowering shrub in the area, and some other things. There's also chemicals and traces of urea, so basically pee, and zinc from guano, and guano was bird or bat poop, basically. So they were using all kinds of things to help control this process.
It's so crazy how useful guano was to prehistoric populations.
Yeah.
Can you just imagine being the first one to figure out that you could use it to make glue and other things like that? It's just crazy, right?
Yeah.
Who even came up with that idea?
So here's the process. They likely filled the pit with leaves from the plants, and that produced, the plants actually are what
the
produced
rock rose plant, right?
plant, the sticky brown resin when heated, right?
Yeah.
kind of just like oozes out of them.
Yeah.
Then they would have covered the pit with a layer of, and this is the burning leaves. They would have covered them with a layer of wet sand and soil, likely mixed with the guano to help seal the inside of the pit and keep oxygen out. So you can see the iterative process here, right? They're like, oh, well, we need to cover this because we need the heat in there, but then it's just escaping through the sand because sand is relatively porous.
Yeah.
But you need to make it a little bit wet.
Yeah.
It wasn't quite working. So then they mixed it with some other stuff. And anyway, this prevents the flames from burning the actual contents. What they're trying to do is they're putting the stuff down there to basically create this heat, right? And then they're covering it with the sand to basically heat it up. They're kind of making an oven.
Yeah, kind of.
An oven, not they're kind of making a cooking surface.
Yes.
They're making a hot plate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So...
Yeah, because what they would do after that is they would build a fire on top of it with thin twigs, which would have heated those leaves that were in that chamber below. And so that layer of sand and guano is protecting the leaves down below it from the fire up above it and giving them that control over what they were doing.
Yeah, because it really is, I guess, an oven. They're just really trying to heat it up down there.
Just gave them more precise control over what was happening to the material that they were actually trying to get, which was that resin out of the leaves.
Right. So in order to see whether or not all this was logical, experimental archaeology.
Yay!
Yeah, the
Our
guys
favorite.
decided, I know the researchers decided to just kind of do this themselves and see what's going on using the exact same plants in the area. So they built a replica and produced ultimately enough resin to haft 2 spear points together.
That's super amazing. Yeah, it took about 4 hours from the time they started collecting leaves to hafting the finished spear points. So that's a long time, but it's probably worth the effort if you've got a much more sturdy spear point at the end of it that you can use for hunting or, whatever you need to do.
Yeah. And they even sat there while they were doing all this and flint knapped the spear points.
Yeah, because with fire and with heat, there's a lot of waiting time.
Process.
Yeah, you got to just wait for it to get to temperature, wait for it to burn, whatever you're doing. So, yeah.
Another interesting thing. So not only do we have the sort of what had to have been the passing down of knowledge on how to create this whole thing and do it, but they realized there's also teamwork involved. Yeah. Because this was probably a 2-person job. I'm a little skeptical on that because when somebody gets really skilled at something, you just don't realize how skilled they are.
Yeah, they probably just figure out how to do it themselves. So
they could have.
Yeah, they could have.
It would have been nice to have probably 2 people there doing it. Yeah, but who knows?
You can speculate that in a community there would have been 2 people. In fact, can't you see like a family situation, like a father and son, or mother and son, mother and daughter, whatever, who are doing this process and working together, and that's how you pass that knowledge down by generation is through the family connection like that.
Sure.
Right?
I could also see solo hunter out doing this too.
Oh, sure. But
they got to chill in the evening. They don't have Netflix.
Right. But as far as passing down the knowledge, wouldn't it make sense for you to have basically a family that just passes it through the generations,
Yeah, the 2 people for these guys was because you have to manage the fire covering the kiln area, and plus you also have to open the crust covering the kiln to kind of just do all this all at once, right?
Yeah. So you got fire management, and you also have like digging underneath that crust to get to where the resin was, and the 2 channels they say that were likely dug on the sides were likely dug to help remove the heated leaves before they cooled, because the leaves were just kind of like, I guess, ultimately oozing this resin, and they wanted to be able to reach in there, pull those leaves out while it was still hot, because there's partial leaf parts left, and they don't really want that in the resin. Yeah. And then just have the tar or resin left over. Yeah. Yeah. So they just put themselves in a little channel, which also means they had some sort of a stick or something they would reach in there to drag the leaves out. Grab it with something, because they wouldn't want to burn themselves, obviously. Yeah. So it would have been very hot in there for sure. So yeah, really very cool process though. And so cool that Neanderthals 65,000 years ago are doing this. Like, once again, give them more credit because they deserve it. Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, we're going to end this episode with a little bit of a fun one, and we're going to talk about kind of the new Gladiator movie that came out, Gladiator II. So if you haven't seen it, there might be a couple spoilers, but really what we're going to talk about is what Hollywood gets right and what they get wrong about Gladiator, some of the big myths. Yeah. We'll do that on the other side. Back in a minute. Welcome back to the Archaeology Show, episode 288. And as mentioned in this segment, we're going to talk about gladiators and
what Hollywood gets right, what Hollywood gets wrong. In fact, this article is from National Geographic, and it's called "What Hollywood Gets Wrong and Right About Roman Gladiators." Because for those of you not in the news or in the aware right now in November 2024, in the aware is how you say that.
In the aware. Got
in
it.
the aware.
Okay.
Is
in the aware.
Is that aside from aqueducts, roads, I'm just to do it right away.
Yeah. Okay.
Romans also gave us gladiators. So
that's good.
But the Gladiator II movie is out, and it is a sequel of sorts to Gladiator 1.
Yes.
We did find out that you can kind of get away with just like a recap of Gladiator 1 if you really don't want to see the whole entire thing.
Yeah, we are definitely going to link to that recap because it's our go-to guy who does the best recaps on the internet, because he's also a little bit like satirical too.
Yeah,
so
he's a little crazy.
He's so funny.
Yeah.
Anyway, I have to admit, and I admitted this on the live show yesterday too, I never saw Gladiator, the first one.
It's crazy.
I know,
you got
right?
taken to task for it too.
I know I did. Everybody's like, what am I even? I know, it's crazy. I have seen it now. I watched it, but I'm not going to lie. I watched it after we went to see Gladiator 2. And the only reason I was able to do that is because I watched a really good recap.
Yeah.
Because you do need to know some of the details of the characters in the storyline from the first one before you go see the second one. But you can do it from a recap. You don't need to see the
Honestly,
whole movie.
though, if you didn't know any of that, I thought it was still a pretty good movie.
Oh, it was good.
Yeah.
I liked it a lot.
Yeah, it holds its own.
The costumes are beautiful.
Yeah.
I love a good bit of like draping fabric, like lovely, luscious fabrics draped over a person, very
Luscious.
Roman. I know. I love all that stuff. You probably weren't looking at the costumes at all, and that's fine. That's not who you are.
Fine. Just assign stuff to me, whatever.
That's my thing. We know this.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, it's beautiful. The acting was fabulous. The movie itself was great. There's some points that we'll go over here in a minute that were maybe not necessarily true.
Yeah.
But you just got to give them some artistic freedom, and I'm fine with everything they did for the most part.
It's much like vampires. There's like been a lore put on vampires, as each new vampire fiction is created, kind of adds to what a vampire is. And then sometimes people take their own spin on it. Sometimes they're sparkly for no reason. It's just like whatever. They're not going to burn into flame, but they'll be sparkly.
Okay. But this is a little bit different because the Romans were real people. The gladiators were real people, and all the characters in the movie, or a lot of the characters in the movies, were real people.
Right.
And they're taking some pretty major artistic license with those people in those places.
But there's been lots of gladiator movies through the years that focused on gladiators. I mean, one of the bigger early ones was like Ben-Hur, right?
Yeah.
A lot of big, gladiator stuff in that with the Roman Colosseum. I mean, that was pretty famous scenes, right? But every time Hollywood attacks it, they don't always get it right.
No,
that's
they
just
don't.
what we're talking about.
And again, like, we're mostly okay with it. The only thing that gets me a little bit is like, the real histories of these people are so fascinating. Like, you almost don't need to mess with it, but when they're making these really pretty stories that get tied up in a nice neat bow at the end, they just kind of have to like mess with things, and that's where you get the fake stuff. But anyway, that's all right. Okay, so just a little bit about gladiators before we start here. Gladiators were seen as strong warriors, right? They were often armed with exotic weapons while fighting in this one-on-one combat. And there would be various settings in any story involving Imperial Rome, and highlighting and contrast the brute strength of the fighters and the pampered decadence of the elite. And that's who they were. That's what they were doing. All right. So this article that we found goes over a few myths about gladiators.
Yeah.
The first one is, did they have nicknames?
I know.
Yeah.
I love this one.
Yeah.
In the first Gladiator movie, Maximus, who was the main character, was nicknamed the Spaniard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't know about that either because I didn't see the first one, as we've discussed. But yeah.
Yeah.
But yes, this is true. And it goes way back. They were known by their personas, and they had fans and followings. It was crazy. Like there were actual like fangirls of these gladiator warriors that are similar to like fangirls of,
fanboys too.
Pop idols today. It's more girls than boys.
Well,
depending on your, particular persuasion as far as that goes.
The Romans
but
had all the persuasions.
They did for sure. So yeah, I mean, there's even a name, I can't remember it right now, but there's actually an actual name for like fangirls that they used for these young women who were just obsessed with gladiators back then.
These are Italians. It wasn't the Tifosi.
No,
that's what they call it. That's what they call the crazy fans for Ferrari. And it's not just Ferrari Formula One though. It's Tifosi actually means it's like it's something like extreme fan or something like that. It's actually a term that they use for other sports as well. Yeah. So actually wouldn't surprise me if it was something related to that.
No, it begins with an L. It was like Ludia.
Well, it was Latin, I guess.
Ludia, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that's the point, is these gladiators had these nicknames, and there was people that just really like loved to follow them and go to all their fights and stuff like that. Yeah.
They even had signature moves and equipment sometimes, which I thought was really cool because, lots of modern fighting video games, everybody has signature moves and equipment. Right. And I'm like, well, the Romans did it first. So there you go.
They always did it first.
Yeah,
they did everything first.
Yeah. But it's pretty cool that they would have done that.
Yeah.
They had an actual superstar who apparently was pretty well known, named Cellidus the Thracian. And apparently there's graffiti in Pompeii that celebrates his victories and his popularity with his fangirls.
Yeah. See? Fangirls, right?
Yeah. Another common myth that Hollywood likes to play on because it makes for good movies. And
this movie definitely did that.
This movie definitely did that, was did they always fight to the death?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the short answer is no, they did not.
Yeah.
It was very infrequent for gladiators to die in battle. And that's because these gladiators, they were often criminals or prisoners of war, slaves, whatever. And some were like professionals that volunteered to become gladiators. But no matter what background they came from, whether they were forced into it or they chose it, they became professional athletes who studied at gladiator schools. Yeah. They spent so much time and effort preparing to be gladiators and training for it. And so much money was funneled into them from their patron, their owner, their master, whoever it was, that these people were not interested in losing their investment by having a gladiator potentially die at the end of each fight. Mm-hmm. So they mostly ended in draws. It was just the fight itself that people came to see, not the actual death of one of the gladiators. Yeah.
And it was a lot of, which we'll get into the next point. Not only were they gladiators, but it was a lot of theater involved with this like violent combat and things like that as well. Mm-hmm. I guess the only real difference between all of this and like, I don't know, some of the things we have today, like some of the extreme sports and,
like
and combat fighting and stuff, is we don't allow people to fight to the death anymore. Yeah. Because it's not that people, fought to the death all the time, which is the myth that we're kind of busting right now. Mm-hmm. But people did die.
They did die.
People lost, limbs and got seriously injured. Yeah. They were using fake weapons.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So, and it does say here that they survived their bouts, 9 out of 10 times. Yeah. Like a 10% death rate, though, is still pretty high. And like none of that would happen in modern day sports, wrestling or anything like that. Like that's not common, obviously. But, so they did die sometimes, but it just wasn't nearly as often as, Hollywood and theater would make it out to seem.
Yeah. All right. So another myth is possibly involving some of the things that they would have put in the Colosseum, because in the second movie here, they really outdid themselves.
They did.
I didn't see the first movie in a long time, and I'd only watched the recap. Did they flood the Colosseum for the first movie? They didn't. No. Well, they used to flood the Colosseum. That is actually a true thing.
That is true facts. And they did do that in one of the scenes in the movie.
Right.
And it was so cool. That was one of my favorite parts of the whole movie. They flooded it and they had like a naval battle scene. And that's all real. They did do that. We'll say... We'll get into specifics of that in a minute, but they did do that.
Yeah. But one of the things that they kind of went over the line on.
We got to debunk this one. This is the only thing that I was like, guys, come on.
Yeah. If you fell out of your boat, you were eaten by a shark immediately. So
like not just a little shark, like a massive great white shark.
Yes. Yeah. So there's a couple things wrong with that. First off, the Romans did not bring sharks into the Colosseum. At least there's no historical record of it.
Nothing.
And I immediately saw that and was like, okay, that's a bit much, because I had at least one problem with it. And I didn't even think about this until later. I didn't think about the catching of the sharks in keeping them alive. I mean, sure, the Romans could do a lot of stuff. They had big nets. They could do all kinds of things. But catching a shark and bringing it on board your ship and then keeping it alive, the sharks usually have to be like kept moving. And I mean, they're fish. Yeah. Right. So you can't just like put them in a tank of water, but then they would have had to have either run real fast or put them into a tank of water or into some kind of
like a wagon filled with water or something.
The logistics of it just didn't make any sense to me. It's easy to get lions and tigers in there, sure. Yeah. But getting a shark in there seemed much more logistically difficult. And I was like, that's not even going to happen. And then during our live show yesterday, we happened to have somebody on, one of our other hosts, actually, Stephanie Rice from Past Macabre. Her study area is Egypt of the Roman period. And she knows a lot about all this stuff. And she's like, she saw this movie and she's like, it wasn't even the right kind of shark. Like they don't even have those kinds of sharks in the Mediterranean.
Right. They can't. Yeah. It was just so over the top. And I saw like a interview maybe with Ridley Scott, who's the director, saying, well, there's no proof that they didn't do this. And I'm like, well, is that a reason to do it?
Hollywood lives historically, like with historical movies, on no proof that it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Which I can kind of respect in some ways.
I kind of love it. Because like you do have to take some artistic license. We keep talking about that and we're totally okay with that. This might have gone a little bit too far, but man, it did make for like a really fun battle scene because it wasn't just like a battle between ships. Yeah. There was the added like terror of being, devoured by a shark if you fell off the ship. Yeah. So anyway, it was the coolest scene in the movie, in my opinion.
Yeah, apparently they did mock naval battles as early as Julius Caesar's reign, which was well before the Colosseum was even completed, around 80 CE.
Yeah.
And again, our expert on the live show yesterday, she said that was actually Julius Caesar started that because he wanted to celebrate his victory of the Romans over the Egyptians. Yeah. There was a big battle that they were celebrating.
Yeah, they didn't need the Colosseum basically to have a battle scene.
Right.
The Colosseum just became a really great place to do it later on once it was built. And so in one of the articles we found out about this guy, Cassius Dio, who is a Roman historian. He was writing these stories maybe 100 years after the fact, so pretty close to this time period. And he wrote that Titus staged a sea fight impersonating the Corcyraean and Corinthians in a naval battle from 434 BCE. And that was the first naval battle in the Colosseum when it was flooded in 80 CE when it opened. So
I wonder what it looked like before it was finished. It must have been really short, just basically a circle with maybe some
more of an oval.
An oval with some like mock grandstands or something.
Another cool thing that we found when doing the research is there has been a hydraulic study of the Colosseum just to figure out what the logistics of flooding it would have been like, since we know they did do that. And they concluded that it could have been flooded by the Aqua Claudia, which would have been the aqueduct that provided water to the Colosseum, in 34 to 76 minutes, depending on how much water they wanted in there and how quickly they were trying to do it, because they could control the flow rate. Is that not crazy? That is like crazy fast, right?
It's crazy how specific those numbers were, because we were watching comments fly by during our live show yesterday. And one of our people put in, it's hilarious that they didn't write 35 to 75 minutes. Like, why 34 to 76?
That's what they said in the paper. Yeah. I think because they're scientists, that's why. And they were calculating flow rates, and the minimum was 34 and the maximum was 76. Yeah.
All right. So the final myth here was the diversity of ancient Rome. Was it actually as diverse as, like, ethnically diverse as the movies would make it out to be? Because in the second one, we won't give it away too much, but Denzel Washington is a black man that plays a prominent character that ends up coming into some power and has a lot of influence. And there's a number of other characters too that are definitely not white. Not that all Romans were necessarily white, but for most part
they certainly weren't. That's the thing, right?
Yeah. And that's what we're talking about here. Was it actually that diverse? And it turns out, it was.
Yeah, it definitely would have been. I mean, Rome was an empire that was conquering, right? They were always conquering people, and they didn't just stick to the European side. They crossed over into the Middle East. They went to Africa, North Africa. Like, they were conquering people from all over. And part of the reason that they were successful is that they did tend to incorporate those populations into the Roman Empire.
They didn't just make them slaves and wipe them out.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that did happen.
They did do that.
That definitely did happen. Don't get us wrong. It did happen. But they also incorporated these people. And sometimes they were able to rise to power, as the character played by Denzel Washington did. His name, Macrinus. He actually was a real guy who was born in what is modern day Algeria. And he, was part of the upper class in Algeria, and he moved into Rome, and, he probably wasn't white. I don't know if he was black, but he would have been something not white, right? And that's just one example of a person in Rome that we know would have had African heritage. And there's plenty more people in that time period that would have been not white. So all the whitewashing that happens, do you remember that show we watched on HBO? I think it was Rome. from like 20, 25 years ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
I don't really remember there being many people of color in that show. They really went very...
And they're all usually British too.
Well, okay, I'm fine with that. You know, that's fine. I'm okay with that. They probably should have Italian accents, but whatever. It's all good. But yeah, so like it's just something to keep in mind, especially in this day and age when race is such a thing that is brought up over and over and over. And we need to remember that these past empires were not always full of white people.
Yeah.
They were much more diverse than they've been portrayed in the past.
Right. All right. Well, we actually covered quite a bit more.
Yes.
And we did that on the live show yesterday. So if you're a member of the Archaeology Podcast Network, you can go check out your bonus content probably sometime by the end of this week. I think this episode that we recorded yesterday for the bonus will probably be up in the next day or two because we're not going to cut it too much. We're just going to slap it together and throw it up in the bonus content.
Yeah.
So...
Go check it out.
Because we want it to
Yeah.
be live. Yeah, go check it out. We did spend most of the episode actually talking about this, plus the new property in Scotland that the APN is going to buy. If you're interested in that and you want to help us out in our GoFundMe that I hope somebody sets up,
that's a joke.
Then check that out. You can watch us drink fancy champagne, and that's pretty much the show.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But back to the Gladiator thing really quick. What we covered more closely on the live show was the characters that are in the two movies, both the first one and the second one, how close their representation was to the real life characters. Because many of the characters in the movies are actual real people too. So we went more in depth on that. And it is very interesting. We'll put some more links in the show notes and you can do some reading about it too. But we really encourage you to just go become members and listen to us talk about it because it was really fun. And we had some great comments coming in the whole time while we were talking about it too.
That's right. All right. arcpodnet.com/members. What is the phrase? You can do it for less than a pumpkin spice grande latte with modification per month. So... yeah, consider where you're spending your money.
Yeah, I mean, we appreciate it. It takes a lot of work to keep this thing going.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to The Archaeology Show. Feel free to comment and view the show notes on the website at www.arcpodnet.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at ArcPodNet. Music for this show is called I Wish You Would Look from the band Sea Hero. Again, thanks for listening and have an awesome day. This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.